Welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. My name is Jim Johnson. This is where we turn chaos into wisdom. 25 years ago, in my first chaos report, I wrote, if you begin with failure and learn to evaluate it, you will also learn to succeed. Failure begets knowledge. Out of knowledge, you gain wisdom, and it is with wisdom that you can become truly successful. In this program, we hope to turn chaos into wisdom. So our program today is on Project Saboteur, and actually our guest, Dion Kotteman, wrote a book on Project Saboteur called Project Saboteur, How to Kill Them, and How to Kill Them. So our guest, Dion Kotteman, is also a partner in Gray Matter Matters. He has a podcast on change dynamics and long history of being a CIO and IT executives. Joining our panel is Jim Creer, our CIO and special advisor, Hans Mulder, our European Research Director and professor at the Antwerp Management School. And we also have Alan Salick, a project leader, executive on complex, high-risk, and troubled transformation projects. So, Dion, tell us about the Project Saboteur.
The Project Saboteur, the book that I wrote a while ago, it is about the phenomenon that people sometimes deliberately influence, change, and destroy projects. And that will be my opening statement, that we underestimate the fact that people sometimes deliberately simply destroy a project because they're not agreeing with the goal that the project is going for. So what we do know is in literature is resistance to change, which is more of a passive sort of thing, where people say, well, I don't like this much, I haven't done this before. There is reluctance to change because they've been doing these things for over 100 years, so why would they change? So that is more this attitude, I don't like to change. But that is a whole different story from people who simply don't agree with your goals and are actively and not passively, because resistance to change is more of a passive sort of thing, they actively don't agree and they actively undermine your project. And that can be done by a lot of ways. One of the ways is, of course, the finance. You could underestimate or overestimate the financial element of project. For instance, if you have a project report, you could overestimate the spend and thereby endangering the project. You could underestimate the spend and thereby hindering auditing. There are all sorts of ways that people are able to influence your project in a negative way. And this is done by a sort of psychological thing that we sometimes underestimate. There is an investigation saying that 1% of people is 100% corrupt. You can't change their attitude, they've got the wrong attitude, nothing to be done about that. On the other hand, there is 1% of the people who have a high level of ethics. It could be based on religious conviction, but they will never do something wrong. So there's these two sort of contrasts, people being 100% perfect and people being 100% corrupt. Now, 98% of the rest decides if they are behaving ethically on the situation. It's situational. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, because if you would, let's take a few examples. If the revenue, the benefit of your action would be dramatically big, you would be inclined to act unethically more than when the benefit will be smaller. So I've taken the example sometimes that I was with a consulting company where they gave me 10,000 euro if I would introduce a colleague of mine to an assignment. And this, of course, is slightly unethical because sometimes I pushed colleagues that were available simply to get the 10,000 euros. Now, this is a simple example, but that could go further if, for instance, you would be given more money to do less ethical actions. So the idea is that if you don't take into account what the interest of people is, then you have a difficulty of getting the project going, because there is something you can do about this. The thing you can do is to understand what the the benefits, the interests of people are in project. Suppose you're doing a project that will lead to unemployment of one or two of these people in the organization. Those people are not the first who will say, hooray, there's a new project going on. They will be reluctant to participate, and they might even get in your way of being successful. Now, if you don't put your mind to that, then they will continue destroying your project. If, by the other hand, you would be able to define what their interest is and have a solution for that, for instance, having a change in terms of education, providing pre-pension funds or whatever, then they might change their attitude and rather participate in your project than destroying your project. So another thing to mention is that incompetence, it does occur, but it's not what I would call sabotaging a project. It's simply that people can't do the job properly. And that happens quite a lot. If I remember well, Einstein once said, there is two things that are infinite in my thinking. One is the universe and the other is the silliness of people. I'm not too sure about the first. So the idea is that well, incompetence does exist, but I would separate that from the deliberately undermining your project. Now, there is a whole range of people who has an interest of undermining your project. It could be the principal, it could be the director, the user, of course, the specialist, anyone that is hindered in their interest to the project. And that's where the solution starts, as I said, that you should try to find a solution for their interest. And well, there are several ways to do that in more, because I'm being very brief now, to analyze how the position of people is, to make, for instance, a stakeholder analysis, which is a simple thing. Usually we make stakeholder analysis is in a rather technical way, who is participating from what background, but it would be very helpful to identify people's interests as part of the stakeholder analysis. And then you might identify people who are in your project not in the right position, simply because they don't have the interest to get the project going. Now, to summarize these few minutes, my idea is that we underestimate the phenomenon of people undermining deliberately your project. And second, there are ways to deal with it if you are able to find a solution for dealing with their interests that are at stake in project. So back to you, Tim.
We are taking a break from our show to talk about gaining wisdom from our success ladder benchmark. Every software project has risk. This is a bet, just as much as buying a lottery ticket or going to casino. However, do you know your odds? Do you know how to improve your odds? Our success ladder benchmark gives you your odds of success by profiling your project against 50,000 cases in our chaos database. It also gives you hints on where you can improve your odds. There are only few inputs and 6 runs in the benchmark. After each run, the benchmark will indicate your chances of success. The Success Ladder benchmark is part of our membership. You can benchmark as many projects as you want and even play what-if games. You can change this or change that, and each run will tell you your chances of success. To get your Success Ladder benchmark, go to standishgroup.com. Now back to our show. So you kind of mentioned that there are 2 types of project saboteurs. There's the person that's upfront and says, I don't like this project and I don't want it to go forward and I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. Then you have the other person that's more passive in their aggression, where they sit back and don't participate. They take sort of pot shots at people and are not overt in their quest to stop the project. Which do you think is more deadly?
I think both elements are related to change. We talked about change, and if you want to change things, then there is a possibility that people are not interested and have a passive attitude and don't want to come along. You can try to change that by dealing with their resistance. And I think it's very common that people don't immediately want to change their attitude in their work just overnight. So we have to keep that in mind, I think. The more deadly element is these active, deliberately undermining your project, because they falsify reports, they falsify the business case, for instance. There's a nice instrument to get project sabotage going, because you overestimate the gains and underestimate the costs. So I think the active undermining saboteurs are the more dangerous elements to your project, because it is hidden, it is not out in the open, and someone who is out in the open saying, I don't like this, that you can deal with that. As long as he speaks out and say, okay, I am losing my job because of this, so what can we do about that? You can talk. But if someone is literally undermining your project without telling you, that's where the risk is.
Okay. Hans, do you have a question for Dion?
Yeah, I have a question for many years, and I have the opportunity to ask it to Dion. We also have some like kind of character we call the whistleblower, which is really honest in his or her intentions and tries to stop the project. And I wonder, how can we distinguish the Project Saboteur from the whistleblower? Do you have some suggestions for us? Yeah,
I think it's a good issue, because they have things in common. They both blow the whistle. Now, the whistleblower is someone who's out in the open. And what we have seen in many cases is the whistleblower is suffering from his honesty. What happens is people don't accept in companies that someone's criticizing your company dramatically, because a whistleblower is someone who says, this is big and dramatic, so we should stop. Usually the reaction from the company around this person is one of trying to get rid of the person. We've seen many examples of that. So the whistleblower has a dramatic risk and is therefore not always a role that you don't see often. The project saboteur is someone who is hiding his activities and is therefore more hard to trace. The whistleblower generates the resistance because he says, this is a mess, we can't do this, and therefore the reaction is put upon him. And the saboteur is sneaky. He says, I don't like this. I'm not going to walk around with a big sign on my chest saying this is the project saboteur, in contrast to the whistleblower. But he will do this in a sneaky way to get things his way, and that is far more difficult to countervail.
Yeah, I agree.
If you look at projects, and we always talk about small projects and big projects and stuff like that, as you think about the community or the size of projects and the number of people, the bigger the project, the more saboteurs you might see, or is that just kind of, is that a percentage of the community, or how do you measure that, or what do you think about that?
If I can jump in with a question, so I definitely agree, and certainly the overt resistors you can get your arms around because they're out there. The question is, are there any metrics in terms of how large the covert wings are in general? Is it a case of 2 to 1, 3 to 1 of the covert saboteurs versus the overts and the whistleblowers that are out there that you can deal with?
By the nature of the subject, there is no clear statistics to this. I do have an estimate. An estimate is that there is probably no project without people sabotaging the project in one way or another. It could be very serious, from completely destroying the project, or trying to influence a project in a way that is slightly better in line with your own interests. So I think that there is no, my statement would be, there is no project without project sabotage. The intensity and the seriousness varies throughout each project, I think. And well, there could be, that there are many examples where I think project sabotage has caused a multi-million project simply to fail and to stop. So, well, I would say maybe we could upgrade the success rate. Suppose, let's take this from this angle. Suppose you would upgrade the success rate mentioned by the standard group from 30 to 35%, which is just 5%. That would be dramatic progress. And and I would say that these 5% can easily be explained by Project Sabotage.
Thanks, Dion, and our panel of Jim Creer, Hans Mulder, and Alan Salick. I want to thank our guest and our panelists for being part of the show, and thank you for being part of the show. I hope we have given you a few minutes of wisdom. We look forward to seeing you next time on Wisdom Wednesday. This is your host, Jim Johnson.